Esquire, right over by Mr. Griffin. And I'm a lawyer myself, and I appreciate the law of brevity. Go ahead, you can sit or stand, whatever you want to do.
I prefer to stand.
Okay,
I'm not going to go over the entire time, but I've known Joe Griffin for
thank goodness.
a century. And tell you with the deepest sincerity that the selection of the governor of Joe Griffin was a wise decision, and you're getting to see a person who has dedicated himself to the passion of law. Joe Griffin, I met him as a lawyer, then came to know him as a husband, a father, son, colleague, and up to today, a dear friend that I speak to daily, including weekends, on legal issues. So I think I have a great foundation for appealing to you for a vote of confidence for Joe Griffin.
Wonderful. Oh, go ahead, Dick. Thank you.
I want to add something.
Yes.
I was given a gift by Judge Joe Nolan about judging. I was his law clerk in the 80s, and when he passed away, he gave me his law library. In that were books about judging. I knew I wouldn't need them, and I gave them to Joe Griffin. In them, there was a sentiment by Socrates about what the qualities of a good judge are: to listen, to answer, to possess the quality of sober deliberation, and to be impartial. He has all of those qualities, and I ask you to endorse his position as a potential judge.
Thank you very much. Was that book you cited, Hennessy, Judge Hennessy's book?
I gave him that one too, but it wasn't. Yes.
Thank you. You have to sit, no, sit up over here.
Thank you. Lift me around, Joe.
Judge White. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Doing in your new duties.
Well, you'd have to ask everyone else, I think, but
I hear nothing
Well, I'm doing it.
things about
Above average.
average. Good.
but it's wonderful to see everybody again. It feels like I was just here because I really was. So it's very good to see everybody again, and I'll keep it brief. I'm very excited to speak on behalf of Attorney Griffin, who I've known since about, good morning, Council Devaney, how are you? I've known Attorney Griffin since about 2009, 2010. I initially got to know him when we were both bar advocates in the different divisions of the BMC and in Suffolk Superior Court. Mostly in Superior Court is where I would see him. And from afar, I always saw that he was prepared, he was respectful, and he was professional. Where I really got to know him was in 2014. We had a co-defendant case together in Suffolk Superior Court, and that's when we really got to know each other well. As many of you know, when you have a chance to have a co-defendant case with someone, you really get to know their preparation as a lawyer, their style, their character, all that. We had a very tough case. He was one of the most competent attorneys I ever worked with. I actually learned a lot. I was up and coming at the time, so I learned a lot about trial preparation, about legal issues, about how to approach a case, really from him. He was also incredibly poised. It was a tense case. The facts were not on our side. The whole thing was on videotape. It was a robbery of the McDonald's in downtown Crossing several years ago. We didn't have a lot to work with. The families were a little bit difficult. The clients were a little bit difficult. And he was always just the epitome of poise. And I learned a lot from watching that as well. But during a day when we were supposed to have a motion to suppress or motion to dismiss, we came in at 10 o'clock. The judge told us, I can't hear you till 2 o'clock, one of those days. So he invited me to come back to his office until we could be heard on the hearing. And we sat in his office for 3 or 4 hours, and we talked about the case, but we talked about where we went to school, we talked about our families, and we just talked about life. He's one of the kindest people I've ever come across. And he's also has this innate ability to get along with anyone and everyone. So he's the attorney that you want if you were a defendant. He's the attorney that you want to appear in front of you if you're a judge. I was a former DA. He's the attorney you want to deal with if you're an assistant district attorney. So I endorse his candidacy as much as I could endorse his nomination, I should say, as much as I could endorse anyone's. He's got the perfect temperament, the perfect experience, and the perfect character to make him the perfect fit for the Boston Municipal Court.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. It's great to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yes.
Nice to see you.
How's everything going with you now?
Everything is going okay.
Through the pandemic, how did you manage?
So when I came on, the pandemic was winding down and then sort of went back up. So it's been up and down, but for the last few months, it's been good, and the court system has managed it very well.
Wow, it's been a tough time.
Yes.
It really has. Well, it's really an honor for this nominee to have you come and witness. Tell me can you think of one attribute that comes to mind when you think of this nominee being on the bench?
It's hard to choose one out of the ones that I named. I would say, though, the one thing that stands out about him is his poise. Poise is a very important trait if you're going to be a judge. You're dealing with a very busy session. You're dealing with sometimes difficult clients and difficult situations, and you have to be able to keep your cool and not say the wrong thing to people at the wrong time. Empathy and compassion, I know, are very important to you, Counselor, and very important to the council as a whole. You can't have those things unless you can maintain your composure. And
About me.
I remember.
Because I said I would never vote for anyone if they didn't have compassion
Yes.
and empathy, and you have it.
So does he.
It was so nice to see you again, and it was really hard, from your heart, what you talked about, because you know him personally and professionally, and that means a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you very much. That'll conclude the witnesses on behalf of the nominee. Is there anybody here in opposition to the nominee? Hearing none. We'll hear from you.
Thank you, Council Jubenville. I'd like to begin by thanking the governor, the lieutenant governor, for the confidence that they've shown in nominating me. I'd also like to thank Lauren Green Petrino, Robert Ross, the JNC, and the Joint Bar Commission for their careful consideration. And I'd like to thank this body for the opportunity to be here. This is not just a list of thank yous. The order of the day today is gratitude. I'm very grateful to be here, not just for this opportunity, but I'm grateful to have the most important people in the universe here with me. My mother and father, my wife, my son, my two dear friends that have agreed to speak on my behalf today, as well as Max Corso and Paolo Corso. I've been so fortunate to have had the career and, quite frankly, the life that I've had. The hard work and sacrifices of my parents not only made it possible for me to get an education, but instilled in me a sense of duty and purpose. The many patient and generous mentors that I've been fortunate enough to have along the way have helped me to understand that our profession is not just about financial gain, but an opportunity to be of service to others. My colleagues, be they district attorneys, fellow lawyers, judges, clerks, probation officers, or court officers, have helped affirm for me day after day that I made the right choice becoming a lawyer, and that the decision to throw my hat into this particular ring was also the right one. And my cup does not stop running over at the end of the workday. Every night when I put my key in the front door, I remember that the most important people in the world are behind that door. My career and any successes that are attributable to that are a direct relation to all of these people. At every turn, I've had giant figures in my life who have taken the time not just to teach me how to be a good trial lawyer, but how to be a good person, how to treat people fairly, how to be patient, and how to be courageous. If confirmed, I'll bring all of this with me, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Councilor Devaney, your 15 minutes starts now.
We're timed, which is unbelievable. I was the only one that voted against that. I think the more we hear from you, the more educated people would be to know your experience and how qualified you are. And I was cut off 15 minutes when on me was giving me an answer that I think people should have known. So having said that, I got to talk fast. So anyway, you're a good writer, and I think that's very important for a judge to be. And I like the JNC question. Sometimes I have a questionnaire and it has one sentence and it doesn't tell me really what happened, what's the result. So I'm going to get right to it. I want you to talk about the writing that you put here. I found it very interesting and educate people about the Rule 36 and how that applies.
So the writing sample that I submitted with the application dealt with this Rule 36, a speedy trial issue, which is a rule that says the defendant has to be tried within 1 year from the date of the arraignment. It's subject to several carve-outs without getting too terribly into the weeds. This particular case was a case that had been sort of on. It was appropriate to file and draft that motion. It was well argued. We got a very well-reasoned decision from Judge Barry Smith, and it was a matter of days, not months or weeks, that factored into that particular case, and ultimately the Commonwealth did dismiss it. So I was very proud of that, and I think writing, as you say, is a very important component of being here.
Right. Tell me about the D'Souza case. That was something that was something that stayed with you.
That case is in the materials I submitted. That was she was a cleaning lady who worked on Beacon Hill and was accused of stealing some property from. I said then, and I'll say now, she made a very courageous decision to go to trial. There was a lot on the line for Ms. D'Souza. She had some immigration consequences to contend with. She took very seriously her good name, and she was up against people that were more powerful than she was, richer than she was, and it was a lot, I think, of courage for her to say, I didn't do this, and to go to trial, and I was very, very gratified when she was found.
You went to the JSC. There's 21 lawyers that have the ultimate responsibility to recommend who's going to be interviewed. You did it the first time around, and who is going to be recommended to the governor. So to me, every one of them should be there, and they used to be, but we never in this administration had the 21 at a hearing. How many were there, yours?
I believe it was 8 or 10.
Isn't that something? So there's at least 11 people who never saw you, never talked to you, never were at the hearing, and gave you appointment. Okay, having said that, it goes out, no one changes it because it should be changed. Okay, now, I want to ask you about being a defense attorney. There'll be people out there and say, well, how do we know that he will be impartial, that he can see both sides? Because we look for fairness in a judge and to treat everyone the same. Tell us your philosophy.
Philosophy is simple. You do have to treat everybody the same. Everybody gets the same fair shake that everybody else is entitled to. There is no putting your finger on the scale. For defense lawyers, for Asha is right. Boys and careful consideration matter. Those things are very important.
I know we talked, I'm talking fast. You can't even tell me how many cases you've had. You have hundreds and that's what I want. That's what I want. We've had someone just 4 months ago. He was one of 13 assistant solicitors in the city hall and worked for the sheriff, never been in court. So I really appreciate your background and if you have very blessed to have them. And I really, what I would like to know is why did you say?
So the district court in general is sort of what I think of when I think of being a judge. And that was certainly the case as I began to consider what this might be like for me. The BMC in particular, I think, is an important place. It's the district court in the city of Boston. It's nostalgic for me. I started my career there. I started my first case there. I met people that are still lifelong friends there. And it's, again, the district court in general is an opportunity, I think, to not only learn how to be a judge, but to intersect with people that are maybe at the beginning of issue or journey that they're on, whether it be addiction or criminality or mental illness. So it's an important role and one that I look forward to.
Yeah, I've been here 22 years and I hear it from every district court judge. They don't want to be anyplace else. That's a people's court. And we had someone going to the Superior Court, only the Superior Court. That's where she wanted to be. That's where her expertise was. And that's the greatest thing. That's why I like to appoint someone, to vote for someone to go to the right place. You know, juvenile court, I don't want anyone unless we have experience in juvenile cases, you know? So, okay, tell me about, you have represented people in drug driving cases. How has your record been on that, and what's your take on that?
Driving,
Yeah, you represent someone, you know, drug driving.
those cases are certainly out there. They do, I think we all get them. You know, they're incentivized to be resolved more often than not, and people tend to resolve them. I have tried OUIs. I've done a lot of different cases, including OUIs. You know, typically people are defendants in that position, thinking about how do I get back on track as quickly as possible. How do I get license back? How do I, you know, sort of put this behind me? So it's the type of case, in my experience, that you need to ask the defendant to slow down for a minute. Let's think about this clearly. Let's make sure that you have defense on the table that might be available to you. So it's an interesting sort of charge, because it's the type of thing that all different kinds of people may have experience with.
You had a lot of real serious murder cases. Tell us about the one that you represented, the man who was accused by his mother stabbing.
So that was a trial that definitely left a mark on me, a young man who was charged with a very serious series of crimes, and the victim was his mom, who had issues in her own right, mental health and the like. The evidence that he had stabbed her rather seriously in the neck. She survived, but it was gruesome. Out of the defense, and this is what made it a particularly sad circumstance, part of the defense really touched on the abuse that he had historically sort of suffered at her hands. It was a self-defense type of argument to it as well. And it really polarized a family that I think was already in deep, deep waters in terms of the people that had to testify at trial, and of course sides being chosen. So it was sad from beginning to end. And I think the last thing that this family needed. But in the end, it was a good result, the right result for the client. And the hope is that they've moved on.
I'm sure that was one of the rewarding cases. Is there one in your career that stands out that was really the most rewarding outcome for you?
There's too many to think of. Certainly the Rosalie D'Souza that we spoke about earlier was one of those. You know, there's just so many defendants that win, lose, or draw, you hope to, the most rewarding part of it is to feel like this worked out fairly. This was the best job that I could have possibly done. The client is satisfied. So I'm blessed to be able to say too many to mention.
Do you think there's racial disparity in the court system in Massachusetts?
I think we have a long way to go. I think rightly we have begun recently to look at that issue and carefully consider it, and we've got a long road ahead of us on that.
I mean, we just had a commutation for two men. The first one that was presented to the council in 25 years. And I went to the prisons, to each of those prisons in Norfolk and in Bridgewater. And after I met with each of them for about 3 hours, I went out in the car and cried. The injustice, two black men in their trials, not one person of color. Could have been out in 11 years if there had been maybe 2 of those 12 and not a mistrial or whatever. That's what I see. But everyone says the same thing. We have a long way to go. What can you do about it?
Well, You have to be as compassionate, empathetic, and considerate as you can possibly be. And understand who the people are that are appearing in front of you. And understand as best as you can where they're coming from, and recognize that some of this stuff, I think as you're alluding to, is baked into to our system. And we're all called upon, I think, to be vigilant for the sort of systemic justice that is there. I like to think that by listening to the clients that I've had over the last couple of decades, that I've learned things that I otherwise never would have learned if I had not done this job.
Well, as a layperson, I just wonder how many are in prison wrongfully. And it really breaks my heart. And you can't tell me that we didn't have any in the last 25 years that should have come up before us. And the last one was, as you know, Joe Salvati, 32 years. This was 30 years, both of them. So, you know, how do we look at those? How do we look into the prisons to see the injustice and try to bring justice to these people? Thankfully, we have lawyers that step up, you know, as we did with William Allen, Thomas, who, one case anyway, that have stepped up. They still would be there if they didn't have these people to do it. How do we investigate the prison system? How do we find out if there's more of the Joe Salvatis who are being prejudiced against? You know, these two, because they were black, Joe Salvati, because he was Italian, and they connected him, and he had no connection with the, you know, mafia. But what can we do?
It's a tough question to answer. The truth is, I don't know the answer to that, but you must take solace in the fact that, as you say, we have people out there doing really good work, the Innocence Project and the like, people that are rightfully looking back at some of these cases and some of these convictions and pressing those issues. Absolutely.
How about the cases that go unsolved? There's so many of them. We had a case in Watertown. We had our first black suicide. So that she was, we don't have time to get into it. 2 years later, she was murdered. Beautiful rocker. She was my friend. And it seems to me, and I hate to generalize, but it seems to me if it's another person from Roxbury, it's a one-day story. I would like to have that whole case. How do you go about that? The injustice of it.
Truth is, I wouldn't know how to answer that question. By the time I digesting an investigation, it's already been packaged and delivered to me. I honestly don't have any insight into the approach old cases, other than to say,
There's so many out there. They just found someone, 45 years, she found out her sister was murdered. 21 years old, she was coming home, we were brutally raped and murdered. It's amazing. How did they check this page or that page? I'm sure they could get all of them. Not that it changes the life of the family, but at least they have some closure to it. So, so what do you think you be the biggest challenge to be in the so I'm actually prejudiced about it because I love it and I know she has my feeling about that because if you work with the district attorney general, that's wonderful. I respect them and whatever they do. But they're given the case, the police gives them they're halfway there. You chose who you want to represent. That means a lot to me. And you got to shovel the snow and pave the rain. So I think it gives you a different perspective when someone comes before you. And you see that person who doesn't have a lawyer and you know what it costs for a lawyer and that you'll be more considerate. I don't know, maybe you could take a first.
Councilor Devaney, thank you. 15 minutes is up, thank you. Councilor Iannella, please. Councilor Iannella, please.
And that's what the rule is.
thank you, Council.
Good morning.
Good morning, Council.
To follow up on Councilor Devaney, I am a big, supporter, fan of people in private practice. Because you know what it is to pay the bills, the secretary, the electric bill, the gas bill, the phone bill, whatever. There's too many times here we have 88 assistant district attorneys who come before us, and that's, I don't know, life is about the sense that, you know, they can't meet the appearance, well, they can get someone else in the office to fill in. It's hard for someone like you to fill in, get someone to fill in. I love the fact that you have 60 some odd cases, all the way to verdict, criminal cases, so you have enormous experience in the criminal field. Obviously, you can't have everything. You don't have as much in the civil field. That's important. I think you're going to be a good fit for the DNC, the town, for council, you don't understand this, especially when you're doing private practice. If practitioners come before you and they want a continuance, I mean, everyone has an obligation, whether it's a court appearance or whether it's a family appearance, a family vacation, whatever it might be. A new client that you have to see. So I hope you'll be very flexible when it comes to continuances.
Absolutely. I completely get that, and I've been there.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions. Like I said, you have a nice group of witnesses who've spoken on your behalf, and I look forward when your name comes before us to supporting you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Duff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you. Great talk with you. I specifically, on your application, I love the answer that you gave on, do you favor further limits on such discretion? You gave a great explanation. You said no, but you gave a great explanation why. So I appreciate that, because it was some thoughtful into it. Issues that you and I discussed that I think are paramount in the district court and important to me, of course, the addiction issue. We all know about that. My feelings are quite strong on it. You know, to solve this issue, I don't know that it is solvable, but the amount of money that would need to be spent and the types of programs we would have to implement, I don't think anyone in the Commonwealth has the stomach to do. I think that's the sad truth. But you will continue to do your best in that, and I know you have a lot of experience in that. A community that is important to me, that I have deep concern about how they're treated in the courts, are people who are differently abled. That could be physically differently abled. Do they have access to the courtroom? Is it easy for them to get around? Some of our courts are older and you know, weren't planned with this thought. In fact, Boston City Hall, you know, one of the first things the mayor did was make the chamber, the council chamber, accessible, because it never had been.
It's the Ionella Chamber.
The Ionella Chamber, named after Chris's dad. So anyway, so it's just being mindful, thinking, looking, realizing that 95% of us will be considered disabled at some point in our life. That's the absolute truth. We will lose our mobility, we will lose our hearing, we will lose our sight. And these folks, these are not other, these are us. And we need to look at it like that. People who have intellectual disabilities. I told you the story about my sister. We had a good chuckle over it. I had a sister with Down syndrome. If she walked in a room, you'd know she had an intellectual disability. She loved candy. She and I did quite a bit of traveling to cross-country road trips. On more than one occasion, I was told that she did a little five-finger steal for the Snickers bar. Funny, cute, all that, but it's crime, right? And having that disability doesn't absolve you of the crime, but the way we treat that person and the way we explain it and everything needs to be taken into account. Now, I'm not talking about things, you know, stealing a candy bar that you'll be hearing more likely from someone that may be what was called on the spectrum or this is so many things that we can't visibly see. And so chiefs have done a terrific job educating. Great credit. And since I'm going on a diatribe here, why don't you talk and tell us, do you have any experience with folks like that?
Sure. So in my own personal life, my aunt, my mother's sister, also had Down syndrome. So as you might imagine, she was in my life from the very beginning. So I understand what you mean when you say when she walks into a room, you sort of know what's going on. And that experience of having someone different in my life, and I've noticed it in my own children. My aunt has passed, God rest her soul, but even they, I think, understood in a very fundamental way that Patty was different. So in the courts, there's sort of a practical approach, and then there's a more philosophical consideration. The practical thing is, ramps and forms and, the access to justice stuff that we can easily do. The trickier part is, as an advocate, if I had a client who had some of those issues or any of those issues, it was important to me to make sure that you were communicating that to the court. Here's some documentation. Here's some people that have written letters that can explain what's going on. And as a judge, I would want that stuff. I would want to know everything that I possibly could about any defendant, but certainly one that had some sort of issues going on. Because you're right, it doesn't absolve them. It's not a free pass, but it's highly relevant information that would be important.
And it's how they feel. And people want to be heard and seen. They want to be treated equally, even if they don't win. Of course, we all want to win, but at the end of the day, the courts are in the business of administering justice, right? Sure. So thank you for that, and I think you will be a good advocate for that community. I have to say, this administration has really, this is the next. I'm not sure what the right word is, but this is one of the next issues that we're dealing with, is people with different abilities, disability, I don't even know the right words we're supposed to use anymore, but we are starting to really, this administration has actively encouraged folks who have not the same mobility or sight or vision that many have to apply to the bench, and I think it's terrific. As many people know, I haven't always agreed with the administration on a lot of things, but I certainly agree with them on that. The other group is LGBTQ folks, same deal, need to be seen, need to be respected. We don't always understand it, especially the transgender thing. Frankly, I don't think we have to understand it. We're grown-ups, officers of the court. We're in charge of taking care of people, making sure they're safe. I don't care if they're green with 3 heads, or whatever, however it is. So have you any experience dealing with anyone in that community?
Sure. I have a case now with a transgendered victim, stabbing case, serious case, and the client is a gay person, gay woman. So I've sort of, been exposed to all those very thorny sort of issues about what was going on between them, why they had the disagreement we had. It is definitely an issue that is, I think, new to us in the court system. It's one that quite rightly we're beginning, I think, to wrangle with. There's been some decisions in jury selection. And things like that. So again, we've a long way to go, but having the discussion and recognizing is, I think, the first step.
Yeah. Thank you. And again, hats off to our chiefs. I think they're doing a great job in educating. And like I said, I'm a member of the gay community, but this is a very challenging issue for many people. We don't need to pretend it's not, but we need to know it's real. And that's what I've heard from you. You touched on one other thing we didn't talk about, but it's important to me because I have a constituent who suffered deeply and continues. His entire life has been formed by his father was a police officer who was brutally murdered, going to the aid of somebody while he was off duty and in plain clothes. Really one of the most horrific cases I've ever read. And when the man who killed him was on trial and everything, jury instructions were not right. He was acquitted on a technicality. This man, he's a man now. I mean, he's probably in his 50s or 60s. This happened when he was 17. I don't have to tell you what that did to his life and his family's life. And he's a right-wing conservative who is a very dear friend of mine. It matters, you know, I'm really glad he told me that story, so thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that are that this is a serious business that we're doing. There is, and look, we're human and mistakes get made, but there's little margin for error, right? And that's the approach to the practice, and that's the approach to the bench. Very careful about the things that I do and say in preparation for a particular case or a trial or whatever it may be. And, you know, you would be something like jury instructions, that's, you know, kind of straightforward. As I say, mistakes can be made, but there's a lot of opportunity there to get it right. And I would want to use all of the time and ability and resources to get something like that correct. I agree.
It's all about judges want to get it right.
Sure.
No one's going in there with the intention of malice. I do ask of your family and friends who are here today to you know, I know they love you and they'll support you, but there may be times in your career, you're a young man, where things are going to be nasty and ugly. And your personal character, and your judgment may be under attack. I'm a strong believer in separation of powers. I don't always understand or agree with judges and what they do, but I believe in the separation of powers. And I think it is really important that that is respected. I think we have the best constitution, the state in the whole country. I think we have the best legal system because of our judges, frankly, because of the council in the whole country. You know, you all may be called on at times to support him in a mental and spiritual way that's challenging, because we've seen it happen. We've seen people not understand a judge's decision and go to his home in protesting, call for not just the removal of him, but to kill him. I mean, seriously, that, in my opinion, that is just not done. It's uncivil, and I don't go for it. So on that, that's the end of my questions. I do want to make one comment, because Councilor Devaney has mentioned this several times, and I'm happy that she's come to this revelation. But the commutations we had were the two first commutations for first-degree murder. We did have a commutation of an African-American woman who was really just happened to be in the room when a drug deal went down and was convicted for drug dealing. And we had 3 pardons before us that with Governor Patrick. So I do want to make that clear. Also, Governor Devaney voted against that African-American woman's commutation and voted against one of the pardons. So this whole new, I'm glad that you've seen the light of this. It makes me happy.
Please, go through the chair, okay? Go through the chair. Go through the chair. Go through the chair, please. Are you finished?
I'm finished, thank you.
Councilor Kennedy.
Should be true.
Good afternoon.
It's true.
I don't have any questions for you. I obviously know you. I know about your experience. One of the things that happens a lot, people come before us and they talk about how they've had so many trials, 10, 12, 15. You list at least 62, which is a pretty good number. And that means a lot too. And as Councilor I know pointed out, you've been in private practice, which means a lot, as I've done for the last 4 decades almost. I made fun of Judge White when he came in. But if you're half the judge he is, you'll be a great judge.
Great.
So I'll be voting for you next week.
Thank you, Councilor Paul.
Thank you, Councilor. Good morning.
Good morning.
I like the system we have, because some of the issues I like to talk about, I've already heard. I don't think I'll go over, Mr. Chair, but if I do, I'll take my 5 minutes after the other councilors have had their chance, as our policy has. You did workers' comp defense when you started out.
Yes.
And on the workers' comp system, how do you think it treats injured workers?
Counselor, I would be remiss if I told you that I had a deep understanding of that. It was my first job out of law school.
Okay.
And I just don't know enough about it.
Okay. I'm going to bounce around a couple things because of the nature of what's been brought up. So first off, so the Supreme Judicial Court has said in Diachenko and other places that we should take into account brain development in adolescence when we're dealing with them in the juvenile court. And yet the science is unambiguous that brain development is not complete, particularly in executive functioning, particularly in men, until the mid-20s. And folks who've experienced childhood abuse, sexual abuse, other kinds of trauma, their development is delayed even further. And that's incontrovertible scientific evidence at this point. What do you think about that? Do you think that we should be taking developmental stages into account even with our young adults as they're in district court?
Yes.
And how do we do that?
First of all, you have to know who you're dealing with, who the person is, what their background is. It's really, as I said earlier, about being informed. I would want to know everything about a particular defendant, especially a young defendant. Because a lot of times with a younger defendant, you are, I think, even as a lawyer, asking yourself, how did we get here? What is going on? Why are we in court?
Do you think, so I mean, how do you get there? I don't know if you've worked with adolescents or juveniles, but I assume in your work as a defense attorney, you've worked with relatively young folks, right?
Absolutely.
So how do you get there? Because as you know, many come in distrustful, especially if you're court appointed. I mean, how is it? As an attorney, it's easy to imagine. As a judge, how will you get there? How will you know everything?
Well, the reality is, to some extent, you have to rely on the people in front of you doing full, complete jobs in providing you with information.
But could a judge step in and push further?
I would, if it was appropriate, demand to know.
Well, how would we know? I mean, if it's appropriate, like, how do we know it's appropriate? Because we don't know.
We'd start with the person's age. I mean, that's probably the biggest clue. Then the facts and circumstances.
Because right now, a lot of young people, you know about the backlog due to the pandemic. Sure. And in some cases, resources in our courts. And in juvenile courts, it's happening. When it's happening in juvenile courts, there's 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds who are living in group homes. They're piling up juvenile records because the group homes are abysmal. Really good people working there. Most of them wildly under-resourced and not safe. Not safe. And our kids don't feel safe. Our kids don't feel safe. Our kids run away from the group homes because there's someone there who's threatening violence, or whether it's gang-related, whether it's neighborhood, whatever it is. And then they're facing consequences for that, for keeping themselves safe when actually the state should be keeping them safe. So I digress, but that's one of the reasons I'm so concerned that the Worcester Juvenile Court has had an empty seat for 2 years as cases pile up. And there's been qualified applicants. So I worry that our kids are getting the raw end of the deal and they're going to finally see someone when they're adults and they're in district court. I guess all I can hope for is taking all this time that the administration is finding qualified candidates of color for that role. Because another thing I know is that kids I've worked with are wildly disproportionate in our juvenile court. It's Black and Latino boys. And I've spoken to them and I know from their mouth that representation matters, that they notice what the courtroom looks like. They notice what all the adults they're interacting with look like. They notice that and they feel ostracized. I'm not here to judge how the kids feel. I'm here to do right by the kids. So I certainly hope the administration is doing its diligence in finding a candidate like that, because I know they've applied. So I hope that's what happens. I'm so grateful to hear racial sentencing disparities brought up more and more and more at our hearings. I met nominees at the beginning who had not even heard of the Harvard study. Now every nominee has at least tells me they've read it. Why do we have the highest Latino incarceration rate in the country, do you think?
Well, as you rightly said a minute ago, and as I said earlier, that exists, that discrimination exists. It is there. Mm-hmm. You can't look at the numbers and think anything differently.
But why do you think? How is it happening? And there's not any one factor, right? I'm just curious your perspective on the system. I'm not saying, because I think it's systemic and there's lots of little things that pile up, but I'm just curious what your perspective is.
I think,
It's not right or wrong, just curious what your.
no, I understand. I think, you know, my historical perspective has always been that you have to blame the lawyer to some extent, right? I mean, the lawyers have to step up too. We're all in this together. And they've got to be advocating for their particular clients, and that doesn't always happen. Looking from the bench, I think you got to understand things like the fact that somebody might have a historical criminal record, whether it be juvenile or as a young adult, and maybe ask yourself, why? Is this somebody that's been in a group home? Is this somebody that's had a history of child abuse or addiction or whatever it might be?
From an over-policed community, right? Because when I have Worcester nominees, I ask, you know, there's kids smoking pot at Holy Cross, and there's kids smoking pot on Main South. I know I'm dating myself, right? But though they faced consequences, and those consequences rippled upstream, and now they're older and they're still dealing with that, right? And they both made the same decisions. So I heard commutations brought up. Another thing I'm so happy to hear talked about so much. The Mass Bar Association has recommended that commutations are a targeted, immediate way to remedy some of the disparities we see in sentencing. Because for some particular charges, as much as 120 days extra in jail. It's a long time. Do you think that the Mass Bar Association is correct to make that recommendation, that commutations, in fact, if they were being used as a critical part of our system, which in my mind should be, do you think that's an effective, targeted way to deal with some of these issues?
I do.
And in the issue of the commutations that we've heard since I've been on the council, of Mr. Kuntz and Mr. Allen, you know, an example of how it's all these little trickle things. To me, it's disgraceful that the jury was all white. However, to me, in those cases, and everyone's to tell their perspective, I thought it was overzealous prosecution. But there's a million ways how it happens. Have you ever been to a jail?
Sure.
How often?
Regularly, every week.
How are jails doing as far as rehabilitation and reducing recidivism?
And putting the whole COVID thing aside for a moment and just looking at
Sure.
it from a historical perspective, you know, there's no, the programs aren't available. There's
6 minutes.
no substantive,
6.
there's no substantive sort of programs that are available. There's no real treatment, meaningful treatment, at least in my experience.
They happen in isolated pockets around the
Sure.
country. All the time.
Units, just that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That are difficult to get into, that have long waiting lists, that you have to have a certain sentence.
Have you been to Bridgewater State Hospital or? Okay. And what do you think about what goes on there?
So I've visited clients there, and candidly, it's been a few years since I've been there. I've been
Yep.
on the whole campus. That's a very tricky place to go because,
Yep, go ahead.
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
So when I was there, it was, and I've sort of read and come to understand that they've, at least changes, but when I was there, it was like something out of a movie. I mean, there were people sort of in the throes of what you could tell were sort of mental illness type episodes.
Psychotic.
Different.
Yeah. A lot of disarray. So I went recently to, I only was able to visit the minimum security, the therapeutic area. I wasn't able to gain access on that day for some reason to other parts of it, but you know, there are good things going on. But I think it's important as a judge to be visiting those places periodically and see what's going on. Because potentially you could commit folks there. Is that correct? Yeah. And I won't get into it, but I've seen in your application, and you alluded to it, Counselor Devaney's questioning on some of your cases, you've seen mental health concerns firsthand.
Sure.
And I appreciate that perspective that I've heard from you. So I have no further questions for you. I have no further questions for you. Appreciate your time this morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Counselor Hurley, she's on the WebEx. She is broken down on the turnpike.
Hello,
Good morning.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, AAA is actually here. He says I'll be on my way in about 10 minutes, but obviously I don't want to hold up the meeting. We talked at some length a few days ago, and I reviewed your in full. You've done, I liked the answers that you gave me, and since he's now riveting my tire, I can't hear very much in terms of what you would say. I appreciate the fact that you've had that many jury trials. That's extremely impressive. And I think you're going to make a great judge. So thank you for your patience, Mr. Chair. Thank you for accommodating me. And I think I'm going to be on my way in just a minute. So thank you very much. I'm coming in for the assembly. Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you, Counselor Hurley. Counselor Ferrero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome. Thank you for applying. I don't know you personally, but I do know Mr. Corso and his reputation in Rehoboth. I saw you went to PC. Did you live down there for some time?
I did.
Where'd you live?
When I was in school. Oh, in Providence.
You ever practice down in Southeast Mass?
Yes. Taunton District Court, Fall River, New Bedford, general area.
Still get down there?
Whether they like it or not, several days a week.
Well, Councilor Jubenville's lost my gain when they redistricted this past year. I got to pick up Rehoboth and Seekonk in my district now, so I'm quite proud to have also as a constituent. And you do have a stellar resume with over 62 trials, as Councilor Kennedy talked about. And make a great judge. You have great temperament. You've been given back to the community with your teaching and your appearances in publications. So you're going to have my support next week.
Thank you, Counselor.
Might I ask you, you've obviously had some experience with jury waived trials.
Yes.
How do you decide whether or not you're going to have a jury waived trial?
Ultimately, it's up to the client. But sometimes you want to explain to a client that this particular issue may be good for a jury waived trial if it's a technical legal issue that maybe would be lost on a jury. And maybe it's the particular judicial personality. Do you think this might be a good case for this judge?
You mean by a good case for this judge?
This is a judge that's going to listen to this. This is a judge that has experience with this issue. This is a judge that's, going to give us a fair shake, that kind of thing.
And how do you know that about a judge?
From experience.
About talking to other lawyers about whether a judge is a certain judge you can jury waive with.
Absolutely. I mean, that's especially when you're maybe in a court that you don't practice in regularly. Absolutely want to rely on your colleagues, whether you know them or not, just to find out sort of who's who.
So have you heard feedback from lawyers in your own experience with certain judges that you would never jury waive a case with?
Sure.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's a sad commentary on any judge that sits in our court system. Because there are judges that have never said not guilty in their entire career. So, question for me is, when I walk into the BMC and I have a case that I think is a case that would be good for a jury waive, and I ask about you, what am I going to hear from lawyers?
My hope would be that you would hear, he's fair, he's considerate, will give you a fair shake, and you shouldn't be afraid to go jury waived in front of him.
He's got the guts to jury waive it and say not guilty if he feels it's a not guilty?
100%.
Yeah, I think it's a sad sad commentary on judges that go through our entire system. No, nobody will jury waive with them. I think it's a terrible thing. But they're sitting on our bench, some of them. So you talked with Counselor DiPaolo about the Harvard racism study. And you indicated that that lawyers should be blamed for some of it by not advocating enough for their clients. Right?
Sure.
Okay. So when Latinos and jail, who puts them there? The lawyers or the judge?
Well, ultimately, it's a number of different factors that go into that decision. Obviously, the judge is making the sentence.
Okay, so you can advocate every which way but Sunday, but the man or woman sitting in a robe is going to decide whether somebody goes into our institutions, right?
That's very true.
And one thing that was touched on, and I've been in the courts a long time, and I've always asked to see my client's record. You have. I've come to believe, and I may be wrong, but I've come to believe that doing that is probably not a good thing. Especially for a judge to see. And I think that's part of the reason why we have this discrepancy in the percentage of different people in our prisons and houses of correction. Because poor people, minority people, get treated differently by police, in my view, than wealthy communities where a lot of whites live. They don't get treated the same way. So for minorities, they've interacted with the police much more in their community and have been charged much more than if they were white living in a suburban town like Weston or Wellesley, I'll say. So they end up having more on their record. And they're more likely to be sentenced to prison because of that. Do you agree with that?
I agree with the concept, yes. And
Well, is it, how else is it that the percentage of the minorities are way, way out of whack in the incarcerated system than whites?
I do agree. I mean, and this idea of sort of this progressive justice is troubling. This because you're not really sure what, as you say, is the source of that criminal record, those skeletons in their closet. So you certainly have to, I think, consider them. They exist. It's part of the calculus. But you're right. It is.
Why do you have to do it? Is there some rule? I've never read any rule or regulation that says, Judge, you have to look at the record of somebody before you sentence.
Right. There's no rule. It is done. And I think, you said one of the first things that you want to do is find out your client's criminal record. It's, historically been one of those things. You kind of want to know what is going on with this person, not like, how bad is this guy, but to say, how did this guy get to this point? And is there anything in there that we can try to explain? Whether it be he's from an over-policed type community or.
Well, you're going to be sitting in the BMC, and you're going to have a lot of minorities coming before you, charged with different crimes, arrested for different crimes, right?
Yes.
And I have always been told that when you commit a crime, and you are punished by our court system, however you're punished, that when it's done and you've completed that punishment successfully, you have paid your debt. Have you heard that?
Sure.
But not so, evidently, with judges. Because when they look at your record and there's a DA saying, Judge, he's got 2 or 3 things on his record and we've had enough of him and we're asking for incarceration, some judges follow that. They go, oh, yeah, he's had 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 cases. So now I've got he's not learning. So he doesn't get the benefit, or she, of having paid their debt to society. They're going to pay it more now, right?
It's true.
So I'd ask you to consider that when you're a judge, and not be one that is throwing minorities in jail because of records that the white individuals would never have, never get. Okay, just something to think about.
Yes.
What do you think of probation fees?
I think the discussion that we're having about abolishing them is a good idea, and it's the way to go.
What,
It's the way to go,
what way to go?
getting rid of them.
Well, you're going to be sitting in the BMC. You and every judge that sits there has the power to do that, right?
By vacating.
And every time at a case, I say, Judge, I would request that you waive the probation fees. Some judges do it without even being asked. Others, oh, no way, got to have the probation fees. And I said, well, they're for supervision, aren't they? Yeah, but nobody's getting supervised, or very little is being supervised. Supervision is peeing into a cup now, isn't it?
That,
It's that, yeah. So I suggest to you that, first of all, you're not being selected and put in the position that we're going to put you in as to be a tax collector. Okay? Commonwealth will make out just fine if the people in your court don't pay a probation fee. And if somebody criticizes you, so be it. You're not going to get fired because you do that. Okay? And most of the people that get put on probation are people that don't have the money anyway, or the money has to come from their rent or whatever, their family. To me, it makes no sense to even have those fees. If we can waive college debt, we can do away with probation fees for the privilege of being on probation, okay? So another thing to think of. So when I ask you that in your court, see how you are. I'm very impressed by your writing, your publications. That's quite a list of publications you did. I envy you. I'm not a good writer, but that's quite a thing. I think you got tons of experience on both sides. I think you got everything. So personally, I think the best judges in that system, I'd rather have the dumbest lawyer in the Commonwealth become a judge if he was kind and compassionate. Yeah?
yes.
Other than somebody from one of our higher institutions of learning that is arrogant, does not have compassion for the citizens that come before him. So go into a court. I hear your name. I want to hear. Wonderful judge, very compassionate to the people that come before him.
You will.
Thank you. Okay, hearing's over.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I call our assembly to order, and I recognize Councilor Kennedy for our prayer and pledge today.
I just ask that we all take a moment of silence, thinking of all the victims of the war crimes being committed in the Ukraine, especially the children. Pledge allegiance to the
Flag.
United States of
America.
To the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hey, I recognize Councilor Devaney for a motion to record advice and consent for the financial warrant.
The governor.
Okay, there's a motion, and there's a second. All in favor, say aye.
I,
Okay, I recognize Councilor Jubenville for a motion to record advice and consent for the pending list of notaries public and justices of the peace.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. I also recognize Councilor Jubenville for a motion to record advice and consent for the appointment of Andrew M. D'Angelo to the position of Associate Justice of the Appeals Court.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Yes, Councilor Devaney.
Lieutenant Governor, I am documenting my remarks, which will be placed in the Governor's Council records on this position. First of all, I want to say Judge D'Angelo's hearing was not seen by the public. His hearing and two others that day were held during the time the councils had shut down public access through YouTube, so no one saw it. At Judge Andrew D'Angelo's hearing, there were no people in this chamber. All empty chairs, not allowed, per instructions to the nominee, Judge D'Angelo, from the presiding governor's counselor at the hearing. Judge D'Angelo was instructed to come by himself, alone. He was not allowed to bring his wife, his 6 children, and his mother who lives with them, or anyone else. He was allowed 2 witnesses to talk in support. There was no one at the hearing who spoke in opposition. The council received no letters in opposition as well. To repeat, at Judge D'Angelo's hearing, there was an empty chamber with empty seats. No one was allowed. In contrast, the same day at Attorney Pappas' hearing, great nominee, with the same council presiding, there were over 20 people in this chamber, standing room only. In fact, there were 2 people sharing 1 seat. Attorney Pappas was allowed to have 3 witnesses to speak in support, in contrast to Judge D'Angelo, allowed 2 witnesses. I am personally publicly apologizing to Judge D'Angelo and his family for the egregious and prejudicial manner he was treated. To start, the judge's hearing had been canceled 3 times without giving a reason. So many judges were planning to attend this hearing, and I heard from them, to support Judge D'Angelo. Justice Green, Chief Justice of the Appeals Court, he told me a week before he was coming in support, he was going to be sitting there and pleased. Judge D'Angelo would be joining the appeals court. Many, first of all, there would have been filled with judges here. In my 22 years, I have never witnessed such an attack, organized attack on a nominee with clear disrespect. And this is a 16-year judge who is so well respected. At this hearing, there was not one question to Judge D'Angelo from counselors. It was only about and all about an incident years back when the judge called an attorney in contempt of court regarding a case that had been going on and on for years before him. The attorney had argued against Judge D'Angelo's ruling to go to trial that he was requested of. The attacks continued at Judge D'Angelo's hearing, even to the other witness, Assistant Chief Magistrate, drilling her only, no questions, about the contempt incident, not a question about her knowledge or his experience with Judge D'Angelo. This was not a hearing, it was an inquisition. It was heart-wrenching to sit through. The whole egregious treatment of Judge D'Angelo, from canceling his hearing 3 times, instructing him to bring nobody, no family, no friends, no judges, no one allowed in the chamber at the hearing, it was cruel. The judge tried to talk on the subject of the contempt, but to no avail. The counsel's attack caused Judge D'Angelo to cry. Tears came to my eyes, Lieutenant Governor. The attorney in question regarding the contempt became friends over the years with Judge D'Angelo. He expressed support for the judge's appeal court position. Counselors poo-pooed that by saying, who would oppose a judge? Many have in my tenure. For example, District Councilor Judge Sikora, appointed to appeals court. 5 people spoke in compelling opposition to his appointment to the appeals court. He is the judge in judicial history that you know, Lieutenant Governor. There was a scheduled trial on Halloween, and he instructed the jurors to wear Halloween costumes, and they all did, passed out Halloween candy, and had a party. Unfortunately, my 1 vote in opposition did not count. He went to the appeals court. I am so pleased to vote for Judge D'Angelo. He has 16 years of experience as a judge to bring to the appeals court. Chief Justice Dawley, one of the 2 witnesses, talked about his judicial excellence, how he spends so much time away from the bench on programs that benefit the judiciary, even mentoring lawyers who come before him, and so much more that I won't get into. We expect judges to give equal respect and the same fairness to everyone appearing before them. So it should be with all nominees before this Governor's Council. Everyone should be treated with the same respect and given the same public access in this council chamber for all, family, friends, and supporters. Sadly, Judge D'Angelo, it appears, was singled out with prejudice. Again, this is a public hearing. Lieutenant Governor, I established a public council website years ago, and it welcomes people to attend our hearings. This is the People's State House. Again, I will be proudly voting for Judge D'Angelo. He will be a great appeals judge. He will make us all proud, and I respectfully submit this document now to you to be in.
If I may,
Yes. Councilor Paulo, and then Councilor Kennedy.
Thank you. I just want to say that in my first term on the council, I've come to be so proud of the administration and the diligence that you put in to choosing the nominees you put before us, and the diligence that this council puts in to every single nominee. And most of our work goes on outside of assembly and hearings when we're talking with folks in the legal community, talking with the nominees themselves. Judge D'Angelo had a tough hearing, as he should, because we're going to vote whether to put him on the appeals court, second highest court in our state, a court that has incredible consequences for the Commonwealth. So I just wanted to say that I'm proud of how this council handles its work, and I'm proud that we put extra emphasis on the higher courts. So thank you, Attorney Governor.
Councilor Kennedy.
First of all, I want to congratulate Councilor Juneville on the way he ran the hearing. Everybody knew going in that it was going to be a very, very difficult hearing for Judge D'Angelo. And I don't think Councilor Juneville barred anybody from coming into this chamber. It's a public chamber. He made a recommendation to Judge D'Angelo, knowing that he would be asked some very, very difficult questions. And Judge D'Angelo followed that recommendation, which was wise of him. He was vetted he had a very tough hearing, and deservedly so, very frankly. The fact that you lock a lawyer up, which he admits he should not have done, that he was dead wrong doing it, is something that we should be bringing up and something that we should be asking him about and expect to get answers with respect to that. It is a big deal that he did that. I don't think it should preclude him from going to the appeals court, and I intend to vote for him. But he was treated very, very fairly by the members of this council. I agree with what Councilor DiPaolo said. A lot of what we do is outside this chamber in terms of vetting people. I personally talked to Judge D'Angelo no less than 6 or 8 times before he appeared here to ask him questions. And and even given that, I was surprised by some of his answers, which prompted some of the questions I asked him, because they weren't exactly in sync with the conversations we had previously. But I think he was treated very fairly by this council. I think he was asked some tough questions. We have a job to do, which is to vet nominees. That's what we were doing with him. And I think Councilor Jubenville ran a very fair hearing and did a very good job, and I congratulate him for it.
Council Hurley.
I would just indicate that I agree with the comments of my fellow counselors to my left. And in addition to that, we are not only responsible for vetting candidates as to their work ethic or their intelligence, but most importantly of all, their demeanor, how they are perceived by lawyers, fellow judges, and the public. And from the very beginning, when I was receiving phone calls and support from Judge D'Angelo, one of the comments that I received was, yeah, he's obnoxious, but he's really smart. All right? And that's from someone who was supporting him. That raised red flags with me because we don't want people in the higher courts or in any court, as far as I'm concerned, where there is a judicial demeanor issue. And I think that the council acted appropriately, and Judge D'Angelo admitted as much in terms of his handling of putting a lawyer in jail and finding him in contempt, realizing the mistake he made and correcting it. But you can't correct the fact that somebody was taken out of that courtroom, physically restrained and put in the lockup. So I think that this council did a good job of vetting. And I think that Councilor Jubenville knew that there were going to be serious problems. And you don't want family members to witness that, nor do you want judges here who are here at the request of Judge D'Angelo, because it's a kangaroo court in that case. So I think that Councilor Devaney may have been mistaken in some of the reasoning of some of the counselors, and she can vote her way, and the rest of us are going to vote our way. Thank you.
Councilor Jubenville.
Thank you. Well, if criticism was gold, the counselor to my right would be worth a lot of money. It's what she seems to do best in this chamber. But Judge D'Angelo and I had a lot of discussions before he came here. And he did want to bring in a bunch of judges, I thought for the wrong reason. And I told him that, and he agreed not to do it. Then I heard that he was thinking about it again, and I called him again. We had another talk about it. And the reason he was bringing them in would have made his hearing a lot worse than it was. No counselor made him cry. He choked up when he was talking about his father coming from Italy and his family. No one had even asked him a question yet. He did handle the questions, I thought, very well about the elephant in the room, which was locking up a lawyer. In 44 years, I've heard that done twice before. That's how rare it is for a judge to do that. And the other 2 judges that had done that in the past were forced to retire. To put handcuffs on a lawyer and have him put into a jail cell for refusing to go forward with a client that was, with all accounts, going to report him to the Board of Bar Overseers was not right. And it was a mistake, and it'll be a mistake forever for him. And he will always be remembered for doing that. You'll live with that the rest of your judicial career. None of us have had handcuffs put on us and put into a cell, but for some people, it's an extraordinary, depressing event that you don't recover from. So yes, he was asked a lot of questions about that. And I had a lot of serious concerns voiced to me by a lot of judges in the system about his demeanor and about being the smartest guy in the room. And a lot of them were said criticizing him, even though he was a very smart individual, and I give him that, and he's a very great writer. So I really had my concerns about it, about what I was going to do. But he handled the questions about the incident fairly well. And at the end, I asked him to apologize by name in this council publicly to that lawyer. He did that. So as one who has made a lot of mistakes in his life, apologizing for it in a chamber like this was a hard thing for him to do. And I appreciated that he did that. And I will be voting for him to be moved on to the appeals court.
Councilor Hurley.
One other thing, when we had the hearing, some of the counselors had the benefit of speaking with the attorney that was held in contempt. I requested of Judge D'Angelo that he have that attorney call me. Judge D'Angelo said, no problem, I will. And as of today, I did not hear from that attorney, which tells me that there may have been a little bit of coercion on the part of the judge or his supporters with that attorney. So I'm going to be voting no.
I just want to comment on
Councilor Kennedy.
the attorney was speaking of. I spoke to him a few times. He called me, I didn't call him. And he's certainly supportive of Judge D'Angelo going to the appeals court, and he certainly has made peace with them. But I can assure you, based on my conversations, they're not friends at all. Thank you.
So demanding.
I really have said enough, but I just want to say that we should be treating everyone in fairness. Today, we had someone, mother, father, everyone, proud day. Outside of getting married and having your children, it's a proud day. We sat here and cried alone, and judges called me who were going to come. Judge Green was over the moon to have him. He told me a week before he was going to come. We have no right to say no one can come in here, but the nominee's family, his mother, and everything, that's what I'm saying. We have to treat people fairly. There was not one question about his qualifications, not one question about his experience, not one question about his mentoring lawyers who have come before him or what he does off the bench in the programs that he has been involved in. Not one one positive thing was said. Only questions about this case. And it had gone on over 2.5 years, and he said, it's enough. And he took that from that lawyer's record. He said, if he had to do over again, but it was a very egregious situation. This woman was going on and on for 2.5 years in her neighborhood with signs and everything, with dirty words, expletives, and they had children seeing it. So after all this time, Judge D'Angelo said, enough's enough, go to trial. And that's how it happened. You know, we put someone in the appeals court that it was egregious to put him on the, what he did with the Halloween party. I'm just saying, this man, I'm talking about the conduct of the council. We should demand the same things that we expect from a judge. We expect a judge to have everyone that appears before them have fairness and be treated the same. This is the first hearing in my 22 years. No counselors asked him any questions. Didn't ask him about his experience. What did you do this? Or even question the justice who came, Justice Dolly. And even didn't question the woman who came, who was the assistant clerk magistrate, only drum up the same thing, which he really had no experience. That's not what we were doing. It's not an inquisition. And I'm just saying that we have to have some civility. We had someone today, that the same counselor had presided, parents, isn't that wonderful? When I walked in here, no one said, I met with Judge D'Angelo. I voted for him 16 years ago. He's a fine person, okay? Now, I was told by a counselor, I hate him and everybody hates him, okay? That was a month ago. I'm not going to go that route. I do my homework. I met with him 3 hours. I met with him 16 years ago. But he told me, I said, tell me, how's the hearing gonna go? He said, I can't bring anybody. I'm gonna be alone. That's the point here. That's the point here. You can make all kinds of excuses and you can throw things at me. You can call me and say I should resign. I'm a disgrace because of the public access. But I'll tell you, all I want is the public's right to know. I respect my counselors, but it isn't coming back. And all I'm saying is, let's have open hearings. Let that nominee bring his parents. God, how wonderful to have a parent alive. That's all. So I don't want to hear all the excuses. I know. And you know, he excused that attorney. Whatever you do legally, it's not on his record. They made friends through the years. It's sad that it happened, but it did.
Councilor Ferrer.
Thank you.
Be the last word, and then we'll move to the vote.
Thank you, Governor. Just for the record, point of correction. Once again, Councilor Devaney has said some things that are not true. She said several times that no one talked to him about his qualifications. I, for one, and other councils in this room, did exactly that. I mentioned how he had tried murder cases. I mentioned how he had taught at various institutions throughout the years for like 12 or 13 years at law schools. We talked about that. I asked him an open question about, you know, you had a hard day. It was reported in Lawyers Weekly in the State House Service. Tell us about the good things you've done for the last 16 years on the bench. And he has done a lot of good things. So to say that he wasn't asked and we didn't touch on his qualifications is just not true. I just wanted that clear for the record. Thank you.
Okay, then we have a motion and a second. We may commence the roll call.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
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 Thank you. I recognize Councilor Ianella for a motion to record advice and consent for the appointment of Nan M. Sauer to the position of Associate Justice of the Probate and Family Court.
I make that motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second?
One point of personal privilege. While we were shut down, the public access, there were 2 votes. I asked the council if they would only have 1 hearing a week, and I was closed out 7-1. I would hope these people would think about it, because you know why? We need people, we need counselors at these hearings. And when you get to the 3rd, it's kind of sparse. And this is not, and then we have another rule that was made, 15-minute rule. This is not get this out, get this hearing off as fast as we can. Let's get this out. That's not the purpose. I want to hear everything I can from that nominee so that the public will know experience, qualifications. 15 minutes was stopped. When Councilor DiPaolo was chairing, I was cut off in mid-sentence. The nominee was going to answer. So I'm just saying it's ridiculous to do this. When we just had the top judge voted, she talked more than 15 minutes. Why shouldn't a nominee talk about it? I hope that you'll reconsider that vote, that 15-minute rule. And the other, to have 3. We all should be sitting here for 3, if you want to have 3, and we're not. And I'm just saying, 1, let's give that nominee respect and ask the questions that have to be asked. We're not here to get out as fast as we can. I'm not anyway. And I have sat at every meeting, every hearing in my chair from beginning and when only. My husband died 22 years ago in January, and you know that. So I really think it's important. Let's show the respect to the nominees. 15-minute rule. I hope you reconsider it. It doesn't make sense. I've said enough. Thank you.
We have a motion and a second. Yes, Councilor Hurley.
It's a matter of personal observation. This new 15-minute rule also gives us another 5 minutes or more in rebuttal at the end of everybody asking questions. And what this rule does is keep 1 or 2 people from hogging the hearing. There's been many times, by the time it's gotten to me, when I'm the last one, I don't have any questions because they've all been asked. But it gives people an opportunity to raise issues perhaps in a different way. And also, I think it's more judicious in terms of allowing everybody to have an opportunity to question the nominee. Secondly, as far as having more than one hearing, I would indicate that I have scheduled an Associate Justice of the District Court nominee for 11:30 and a District Court Clerk nominee for 10:30 on May 4th for 2 reasons. First of all, they've both asked Judge Gross to testify, and he needs to do it on WebEx. So it's just economy of scale in terms of that. He does the drug court on Wednesdays. And secondly, don't anticipate there's going to be any serious number of questions because both of them are excellent nominees. If there's a contentious hearing, then that can be a different story. But I think that this has more or less streamlined things, and I feel I have more of an opportunity to get my turn to ask questions and maybe do it a little differently. That might shed some new light on things. Thank you.
Let's return to the motion and the second of the appointment of Nan M. Sauer.
Second.
It's motion and a second. We may begin the roll call.
Yes.
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 Thank you. I recognize Councilor Ferreira for a motion to record advice and consent for the appointment of Teresa F. Lamar to the position of Circuit Justice of the District Court.
Governor, it gives me pleasure to make that motion. Second.
There is a motion and a second.
Governor?
Councilor Ferreira.
I would just like to congratulate yourself and the governor, the JNC, and everyone else involved in the selection of Teresa Lamar. I've known her since she came to my class about 6 years ago on how to become a judge. And it was hosted by Lon Povich and Sharon Casey and myself and some people from the JNC. And it worked because I'm a firm believer that we want good local attorneys to be good local judges. And here we are 6 years later. She has an outstanding resume. She's from Council Juvenile's district, hometown of Holyoke. She's practiced out in Springfield. She's practiced in 3 different DA's offices. She's been instrumental in the New Bedford school system, helping with absenteeism. She's had private practice, and she has a 5-star rating for temperament and demeanor from every single person I've talked to. I can't tell you how many judges, lawyers, and clerks have called me to support this nomination. So thank you very much.
He said, I'm not going to add a thing. She's great. I'm sorry that everyone didn't see her because she was excellent. And out of the 3 hearings, she and Mr. Pappas had their family and friends. What a blessing.
Okay.
Judge D'Angelo didn't.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. We may begin the roll call.
Yes.
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 Thank you. I recognize Councilor Duff for a motion to record advice and consent of the appointment of Raquel D. Ruano to the position of Associate Justice of the District Court.
Thank you very much, Governor. Excellent appointment. I'm going to put her name into nomination.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We may begin the roll call.
Yes.
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 Okay, thank you. This is our final motion today. I recognize Councilor Jubenville for a motion to record advice and consent for the appointment of John B. Pappas to the position of Associate Justice of the Superior Court.
So moved. Second.
There's a motion and a second. we may begin the roll call.
Yes.
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 With pleasure, yes.
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 All right, that was, yes.
I want to thank you and the governor and your staff, Lauren Green and her staff, all the counselors, and Valerie and Sonia and Aaron for working behind the scenes to put this WebEx back on. It took a while, but there were a lot of pieces that had to be put together and it finally happened. And I want to thank everybody involved in it, all the counselors sitting here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Governor, just for the record,
Yes, Councilor Herbert.
Barbara Burton's hearing is at 10:30 on May 4th, and Brandon Freeman's hearing is at 11:30 on May 4th. And I believe that they will both be handled expeditiously and in a timely fashion. And the new nominees?
There are no new nominees, but we had a very full agenda today. So I thank you all for the incredible work you put into the nominations and confirmations. Have a great
Thank you,
day.
Governor.